All right, so in this video, I wanted to go over the initial steps for setting up a switch. I have a small network here with a router, which has a default gateway interface already configured. And in this scenario, we are treating this switch as if we had just bought it brand new and we just literally plugged it into the router right now, but we need to initially set up this switch so that it can be configured. So whenever you're setting up a switch or a router initially, you typically need to connect to it with a console cable. And in Packet Tracer, it's this blue one here. Let me actually show you what this looks like here. Okay, so this is a console cable. Now, one end has an RJ45 connection. You can see that. It looks a lot like an Ethernet cable. If you notice the pinouts, if you can see that or not, but the color code and pins, I can get it to focus there. You can kind of see that. The color codes are different than what you'd see in an Ethernet cable. The other end is a standard serial connector. If you have a laptop that doesn't have a serial out, which is common, I don't have a serial on my laptop. I have an adapter cord that goes from this end to a USB that I'm able to connect to a switch with my laptop. You can also get these serial console cables with a USB connection on one end and the RJ45 on the other end. But this is the cable you're using right now in this simulation. We'll go back to the Packet Tracer. So that's what this cable is right here. On the device, let's see if I can just... It doesn't really show it very well. It's probably on the other side, but there is a serial connector. It looks a lot like an Ethernet cable, but it's usually set aside somewhere. And it usually, on Cisco devices, it has a light blue line around it usually, and it says console. So anyway, we're going to connect to this switch now using this laptop, using the console cable. We're going to open a terminal program. This could be PuTTY or something, another console, another terminal program such as that. You notice it connected right to the switch. So we'll go into privileged exec mode because it drops you off in user exec mode to start off with. Notice the prompt with the greater than symbol. Go into privileged exec mode with the pound sign symbol. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the host name. And we'll just call it S1. Now, you got to be in global configuration mode. Hostname S1. You notice the prompt changes from switch config to S1 config, still in configuration mode. Now we're going to secure the user exec mode, which is also the same thing as securing the console line. Because when you connect with the console cable, it drops you right into user exec mode. And that is a line configuration command. So to type in line console And there's typically only one console line on a device, console 0. And so password of Cisco, type the login command, and that will prompt you to enter a password, the proper password, whenever you connect with a console cable. So let's drop out of line configuration mode back to just global configuration mode. And let's set a password for privileged exec mode, and that is enable. And we're going to do enable secret so that it will encrypt the password in the running configuration. And we'll use the password of class. To show you what that does, let's just exit out of this. Should close this. Reconnect. And notice now we've connected with the console cable. It's asking us for the user exec password, which was Cisco. And now when we try to go into privileged exec mode, it'll ask us for the password, and that one we chose as class. Okay, so that's done. Now we need to secure the virtual terminals as well. And virtual terminals are logical connections that you can use to connect using Telnet or SSH. And those are also line configurations, so we need to use line configuration mode. It's line VTY. Most switches have virtual terminals 0 through 15. And this, if you hit question mark, it'll show you what options there are. In this device, it is 0 through 15. So we'll type 0 space 15. So we're modifying all virtual terminals. Set a password of Cisco. Set for login. And now we have secured the virtual terminals as well. There's a few other things we need to do. We need to make sure that all our passwords are not in plain text in the running configuration file. I'm going to show the running config right now. Notice the enable secret password is encrypted in the running configuration, but if you look down here, line console 0, password Cisco, it's in plain text. We don't want that. We can do that. We can fix that. The service password encryption global configuration command. And now if we look at the running configuration again, we'll see that those passwords are no longer in clear text. We also should set a banner message. And we should also set up a switch virtual interface. And the switch virtual interface allows for users to connect to the switch using Telnet or SSH if you enable that. You need to have an IP address on the device, on the switch in this case, in order to access the device. The switch will work as a switch just fine without an IP address. It's a layer 2 device, but it's hard to connect to it without having some type of an IP address to point this laptop to. And that is an interface command. That is an interface configuration command. We're going to modify the VLAN 1, which is the default VLAN. set an IP address of 192.168.1.254, which is the last IP address in the network, last usable host address in the network, I should say. And now we have enabled a switch virtual interface. Now that allows us to remotely manage this switch. Like if I were to plug this laptop in using an Ethernet cable to one of the switch ports, now I'd be able to access the switch using Telnet. Now, if you needed to have somebody access it remotely from outside this local area network, let's say you had a network that was connected to router 1 on the other interface, you would actually need to define what the default gateway is for this switch. So let's go ahead and just set that up. So I know we're going to need to have users access this switch from outside the network. What you do is on global configuration, you can type IP default gateway, and you're going to define the default gateway, which is conveniently given to us right here, 192.168.1.1. It's the IP address of this interface. All right, so let's disconnect the console cable. Let's connect the laptop to one of the switch ports. If I've done this right, we should be able to telnet. To the IP address that we assigned to the switch. What was it, Cisco? Yes. So now we have used Telnet to connect to this switch. Now Telnet is perfectly fine for when you are initially setting up a device, as long as it's not live. The second you are live, the second you are in production mode, and other people outside the network, or even other people inside the network even, have access to this switch, you should be using SSH only in order to connect that. So let's go ahead and enable SSH. SSH is set up on the virtual terminal lines, but the first thing we need to do, in order for SSH to work, the device must have a unique host name. And we'll just give it cisco.com. We also need to generate an RSA key. And let's make it really strong. 2048 bits. Now we need to go into line configuration for our virtual terminals. Notice SSH has now been enabled. Now we need to limit it. So we'll put transport input SSH. We're going to set a username and password for SSH. We'll use username admin, secret, use Cisco again. In real life, you would not use the same password as you used for Telnet, but this is just an example. Okay, let's exit out of this. Now we're still in the command prompt. And to connect, I think it's -L. Yeah, okay. So SSH -L, username we set was admin, and the target is 192.168.1.254. Password we set was Cisco, and mistyped there, I felt bad. Or oh, I think I know what I did wrong there. Let's try that again. There we go. Yeah, I mistyped it. So now we are on the switch using SSH. This is a secure method to access the switch. Now it still drops us in user exec mode. So it's going to ask us for a password to go into privileged exec mode. But now you have access to the switch remotely using SSH. And now our initial setup for the switch is complete. You can see the running configuration. And all the passwords are hidden. And we've limited the input to SSH. Telnet should not work. Let's try that anyway. So back at the C prompt for the command prompt. And its connection to the switch is closed by foreign host. In other words, can't connect to it using Telnet. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email. Otherwise, have a great day.